Okay, thank you for tuning into Stampscaping 101. This is my second stamp-along video. And in this video, what I go into is I show how to manipulate the different layers of depth within a scene with the use of value, okay, with the use of the different colors, light, medium, and dark tones, okay, in a very simplistic way. The stamps needed for this video are the water pattern, the Pine Row, Lakeside Cove Large, and Reeds. I'm keeping it kind of in the same design scheme as the first video, just to keep things really simple. You can always use different types of imagery if you want to. What you want is to have some kind of background imagery to put in there, okay? And what I mentioned in the video is you can always use like the trees from Lakeside Cove Large. Again, just don't stamp out this bottom part, but you can utilize these trees, you know, in place of something like the Pine Row. All right, if you don't have clouds like this, oops, I use the cloud cumulus as well in the background and in the water reflection. If you don't have something like that, but if you had something like this moon, you can always stamp it up there and down here as a reflection if you want to. Stars, anything like that, okay? But you'll need three different values of some color scheme. It doesn't have to be blue, though, okay? But basically what you're going after is you want a light, medium, and dark tone of whatever hue you're working in, okay? And, of course, black. Use your favorite black pad that you have. And in this case, I use glossy cardstock and some sort of sponge applicator. I use a little bit of the cosmetic sponge just to show how you would, you know, apply that tone with these. And I use my color box stylus tool. All right. So like I said, you can always substitute things, but the basic concept is going to be the same, and that's how to utilize your values to create depth instead of just stamping everything out in black ink as far as the imagery goes. I stamped this one out in the first video in color, and that kind of pushes it back in the distance a little bit, and we do a lot of push-pull in terms of the color scheme here in our actual imagery, in the foreground imagery in terms of these reeds. In the midground here, I don't know, it kind of looks like distant things to me too, but in the, you know, within the main image, instead of stamping it on black, I did it in the color, and we used a middle, you know, color, medium tone blue for these trees in the background there. So in every case, in every layer of depth, we've kind of pushed the values scheme kind of back and forth, you know, between lights and darks in those areas. So it just gives it a different look, and it's going to be the basic concept for any kind of visual depth that you do. You can always do some other things in imagery in other values other than, say, black or something like that, you know, or trees that are green. You can do them in a lighter green if they're even farther back in the distance and you want to really push that idea visually with the use of color and value, okay? So this is the scene that I use, or the type of scene, not this exact scene, but this is the project that I would have in my Stampscaping, I was trying to think of what it was, 102 or 201 class, you know, the class that I would do after the beginning class. Even though I do see this as a beginning technique right here, it's just manipulating your color scheme a little bit. In the first class, I would just have people do backgrounds, you know, utilizing some different color schemes, going from lights to darks, and kind of getting used to that kind of idea. And in the second class, I would do like a monochromatic scene just with all blacks and tint it, but this was like one of the, either the first or the second scene that I would do, and I would have them go back to their color scheme that they were working on and just, you know, play that push-pull visual effect using values to create, you know, for distance. All right, so these are fun looks, you know, to do, and I think it really makes things a little bit more alive. The water in here, instead of just stamping it all one monochromatic look, you know, dark blue or black or something like that in there. I utilize the colors in here, and I just think it makes it look a little bit more shimmery, okay? And I think lighting is kind of represented a little bit more fully in something like that, you know, when you have atmosphere in the air and you have light reflecting off of it, things in the distance look a little bit more, they look lighter than things in the foreground, okay? So anyways, if you choose to stamp along with me in this video, I hope you have a great time. And as always, if you have any questions, just drop us a note in the comments and we'll try to answer them. Alright, so fun stuff. Thanks for watching. Okay, we're going to learn how to use our color scheme, our value scale, light, medium, dark tones. You can even include the black pad in there, to extend the range of the visual depth within a scene. And just to keep things simple, I'm going to go with the same basic composition that I did in the previous scene. I'll use my Lakeside Cove Large. You can use the smaller one. Some background trees. This is the pine row. Just for some variation, I'll use the cloud cumulus this time. And we'll put in some water pattern textures into the scene, as well as placing a foreground of the reeds again, okay? Now, just to compare this with the previous scene, this is the previous scene in the Stamp Along video, what will probably be a series. There's basically very little depth in here. I mean, you can say that the moon in the background is your background. The pine, Lakeside Cove is the midground, and then the reeds, large, are the foreground right here. But for me, I mean, this scene, it's fairly flat looking, okay? There's not a lot of visual depth in the scene. All right, now that's what we really want to push, but let's do that with the same basic color scheme here, the same basic stamps, and we'll just use color in a little bit of a different way now. Now in the first scene we stamped out our hot sun in the let me see, I think I used it in the darker blue. I think it was a Memento Danube blue. So that kind of pushed it back in the distance a little bit by having it as a color, a value that's lighter than black, okay? Now let's really push that in this scene. And let's take a look here. All right. Now in the first scene I just stamped that in black. Now we're going to go in and let's do that in a color. Let's go with kind of a navy blue. All right, I'm going to use the navy, the Marvy navy blue. I'm looking at this. I didn't really clean this off from my previous usage in that first scene, but I'm just going to go right on here with the dark blue. Okay, it'll kind of stamp out kind of a version of dark blue. There'll be a little bit of black in it, but that's fine. All right. Now on this scene, I'll stamp it. Well, let's do this again. I'll stamp it towards the bottom of my scene again, just so we can do a little bit more of a comparison with the first scene that we did in the first Stamp Along video. Okay, large stamps, plenty of pressure across the stamp, top, bottom, middle, especially. Okay, we have that. Now, that was in the dark blue, all right? Now I'm going to add some depth in here with the use of some background trees. Okay, now this is Pine Row. If you didn't have that Pine Row, what you can do is you can just kind of color in some of the trees off the Lakeside Cove again. Don't color in the bottom part, and then you can use those trees as background. If you wanted to, you can take a mask and you just mask off those rocks if you want to, and just stamp those right over the top, okay? You don't need to mask off the trees because they're solid, but mask off those rocks because they're open, alright? But I do have the pine rose, so I'm just going to use that. Okay, now, if that color there represented something a little bit closer to us, the darker it is, usually the closer it will be visually for us, most of the time. So let's go to the medium tone blue here, and color your background trees. If it's this one, then just use those ones again. Okay. And I'll stamp these like so. You can really do this with any color scheme. If you want it to look like a sepia print or something like that, then do it in browns, you know, use some distress inks or whatever. Okay, now those ones look a little bit more distant, right? Because they are lighter in tone. But now we have these reflections down here, so what I'm going to do is I'll tell you, in the reflections maybe I'll stamp them a little bit lighter, so I'll stamp this off, and then with the second impression, the blotted version of that color, stamp it in the water. Okay, ink it up again, blot it off, stamp it like so. Alright? So, that's what you're going to do. It's not a perfect mirrored, you know, version of what's happening above it, but it's not really going to matter. That's, you know, you'll be nitpicking if you're kind of saying, wait a minute, that tree branch doesn't match up with that one. Who cares, you know? Okay. So, if you need to pause this video right now, go ahead and do so and catch up, you know. I made 1, 2, 3, 4 impressions with that. 2 with full ink, and 2 with a blotted version down below. Alright? Okay. Let's go with something even farther in the distance, and that would be the clouds, okay? You could do, you know, like that moon type of thing again in the background, any type of sky figure. It could just be, if you don't have any sky figures at all, or any clouds, don't worry about that. We'll just use some tone in the background, you know, to represent some, you know, particles in the air illuminated by the light source, whatever. It could be like some misty, wispy clouds or something like that, just created with some sponging effects. But if you have a sky figure, like this one, what you'll do is you'll do it in, you could do it in the same color that, you know, that medium tone blue, like a Hama blue and Memento or something like that. Kind of like a royal blue, I guess it is. Alright, but I will use this Cloud Cumulus. I haven't used this in a while, I don't think. I stamped it out because I wasn't quite sure what color was on here from the previous time. Let me check this out. As you can see, I don't rehearse these videos at all. Okay, we're going to stamp this out right over these trees right here, okay? But I could leave some room up there. I'm not really quite sure if I want to leave some open area up in the sky, maybe. Or I can just kind of fill it in. I'll put some down here in the water as well. Okay. So we have 3 layers of depth right now. Alright. Background, midground, foreground, I guess you can say. And I'll stamp out what will become my foreground later. Okay, and that's going to be the reeds, large again, just like in this scene right here. So you can see it's kind of taken on a different character right now. Alright? So stamp your sky in there. You can pause this video, and when we're ready, we'll start stamping, or we'll start filling in our scene with some color, okay? I'm going to take my sponge applicators, get a new one here, because I didn't color, didn't wash that one off from previous usage. Alright, now these Marvy inks are a little bit thinner. I could just go on straight on with them, but I'm going to use the Memento Summer Sky color. These Mementos are a little bit thicker. Alright, most inks are as thick as the Memento. The Marvy ones just happen to be a little bit thinner. So they're good for, your impressions, but as far as using your first color, I like kind of a thicker ink, such as this Memento. Anything from Ranger, their inks are fairly thick and they're easy to spread on glossy cardstock. By the way, this is glossy cardstock again. In about a 1/4 page size, 4.25 by 5.5 inches. Okay, you can use a 4x6, whatever you want. Okay, this color right here is fairly light. My pad is probably a little bit dry too. But here's what I'm looking for, okay? Now as you start applying some ink, retain some of the white of the page in these clouds, okay? Don't just tone them all out, but for the most part, I'm going to be bringing in color like this one into the scene from the outside edges, but I will retain some of the white of the clouds. Go ahead and bring this color right on down into the water. Now if you want this water to be reflecting like a mirror what's going on up in the sky, then retain some of the lightness down here. So just don't just don't tone it out, okay? Leave some areas in here light. But come into the scene, when you're inking it up, I would say come in, this is the lightest color that we'll be using, so come in about maybe 1.5 inches from all sides, okay? Now it's not an exact formula. If you want some of that cloud to remain a little bit light over here, then just don't bring it in, but maybe come into it underneath it a little bit, okay? So what you're doing right here is you're kind of defining your light source through the use of value, all right? Through the use of kind of shade. I like to bring in some of this tone right along my rocks right here. I might retain some of the lightness of some of those rocks though, like they're kind of capturing some of the light from above. So maybe some of these rocks right in here I'll just leave as is. But for the most part, around the perimeter, like down here, especially in the corners, I like to add quite a bit of tone, okay? Now, if you were in my workshop and I was kind of walking around, one of the things that you'd always hear me saying to everyone in the first color that we'd be using is use more. Because some people would they would put a few little taps, and that would sufficiently color that area. What I want people to do is kind of to give the perimeter, especially, a pretty good soaking with this ink, so you kind of start to get close to, almost, a fully saturated piece of paper. And the reason for that is when we move up into our darker tones, they spread along the paper easier than if you were working on a dry piece of paper, okay? Now these Memento inks, they're all really thick, so, they pretty much spread, easy anyway, but just as a good exercise. Plus, the more ink you put down, especially with the lightest of tones, the more vibrancy you'll be achieving in the end result, because there's a thick layer of that tone laid down, so it's not going to be so anemic looking. Alright, this is the next color. You can use like that royal blue. In this case, it's more of that light blue from Marvy. This is the color that I stamped out my background trees in, that pine rose stamp, okay? just go ahead and apply it in. Remember, if you've watched that first video, one of the things I mentioned is kind of just working one area at a time. Don't try to be too perimeter oriented like this. Don't work the edges like that. Kind of work quadrants, one quadrant at a time, and trying to get it almost fully realized, okay? Now see, right around here, I'm kind of being careful. Right around my robs, I might be changing the angle of this and just kind of taking it in like this. See that it's not flat. I'm at an angle like this, so I can kind of get along these rocks down here at the base of the rock. Now, if I have a fully, big area to fill in, then go ahead and tap the whole, stylus tool or sponge tip, whatever you happen to be using to apply your color with, okay? Okay, and I use a lot of this swiping motion. I like getting a lot of color, in one area. And then what I do is I wipe it in like that. And it gives me a nice smooth transition of color and value, because you get more saturated with that given color on the perimeter. And as you swipe it in, okay, there's less of it like that. And there's less of it because this is a lighter interior, okay? So you get that nice transition. So what you won't end up with in the end result is a big harsh line just of darkness, like that. And it's like white in the middle and untouched, okay? You go for more of the swiping motion like this. Okay. One of the things I forgot to do in that first video too is when I was using these sponges, I don't know if you'll be able to tell, let me see this in this right here, okay? If you're using a sponge, you can kind of use the same type of motion like this, alright? I don't know, if you don't have this, maybe you can try it with a cotton ball or something like that, or a paper towel that's been wadded up. That's what, these are all things that, we would do at one point in time, back when. And that's back, before there were really any accessories for rubber stamping, so everyone just had to kind of make up a tool just out of, I don't know, almost found objects or something like that. Okay, adding more and more. Alright, this is a good tool, but my stylus tool is easier, so I'm going to use that one. And I keep applying this. Now, when you're applying your tone, what you're looking for is a complete saturation of a given color, okay? So this one happens to be that medium tone blue. If you're using a Memento, it'd be the Bahama blue. Just if it keeps getting darker using that existing color, just by adding more, then do that. Okay, now just at some point in time, if it just doesn't seem to be getting any darker using, that given color, that's when you know to move on to your next color. It means you've kind of, you've fully realized that given color in the scene, so move on to the next one. And you can see, I've retained some of that lighter area in there by just simply not going into it with that existing color, the color that I happen to be on. This is a kind of a navy blue. It happens to be the Marvy number 3 blue, but it's really similar to the Danube blue. Alright, now this is the same color that I stamped out my Lakeside Cove in. Alright? So now, by using that color, it should start to blend in the imagery that was stamped out in that color. Okay? And I feel the depth of the scene, the depth by using all of those existing colors, it's starting to make more sense visually now. Okay. 4 corners, using it up here in the corner. Now, one of the things too is now that you're on kind of one of the darker tones, work it in an area longer before you take it into your scene. Okay, one of the things that would happen a lot of times in workshops is we get used to a certain rate, you know, tapping, moving in, swiping, whatever. And if you're doing that with a really light color, that's fine, because, you know, if you swipe in a really super light blue into the scene like this, by the time you swipe it, you know, in the middle here with your sponge applicator, that area in here is going to be very light because it was a light color to begin with. But if you're working with a dark color, you know, you don't want that right in the middle of your scene, okay? So, in other words, tap longer, work the outside edge longer when you're on your darker colors, okay, before taking them in. And you will retain that nice lighter area of your scene, and thus defining the light source within a scene by the use of shadow, okay? If everything's dark, the darkness isn't really defining the light because everything is just darkened out, okay? Now, if you ever get something like that in the middle of your scene, okay, a lot of times what people would do is they would say, oh my god, I got that, you know, so they try to blend this out, and they just keep going over it and over and over it, and pretty soon, instead of one little blotch like that, they'd have this gigantic silver dollar sized one, okay? If that ever happens in your scene, okay, and you don't like it somewhere in the lighter areas, don't try to just blend it out using that existing dark color. Go back to your lighter colors and bring the background a little bit closer to that tone by making it darker, okay, with those lighter tones. So in other words, just decrease the contrast between that unwanted mark and your background, and it won't show up as much. It won't be as prominent. Okay, so a little bit more depth in this scene, I would say, than this one. Now, alright. I was thinking, I didn't leave very much room down here in this water for what I'm going to do with this water texture stamp, but let's use it anyway and let's see if it shows up. Okay, now, we have our color scheme, light, medium, dark. Now, texture, this water pattern stamp can be used in the water for added texture. Let's start it off with the lightest one. I have a feeling we're not going to be able to see it at all. Maybe I can just see it a little bit down here in that white area, but for the most part out here you really can't see it. So, but that's what we're going for, okay? I have this, I used it lightly, you know, in a lighter tone. Now, with this darker tone, the medium tone blue, what I'm going to do is I'll stamp that medium tone one right around in here, like so, okay? Maybe in the lighter areas, though, I won't go into it as far with the medium tone, okay? So we're using this same color scheme for additional textures within the water, too, okay? This, after all, represents lighting, so maybe the shadows, you know, in the light are going to be lighter than the shadows in the dark. So, that being said, with this darker tone now, it's the number 3 blue from Marvy. It's the more of the navy color, okay? See that right there? So you get this more shimmery texture by using, just going back to your color scheme that you've been using, okay? Right? Sorry. Get it to focus in. See that right down there? It's more mirrored, I think. Well, maybe not mirrored, but just shimmery using your color scheme down here, okay? Instead of just stamping it out all monochromatic. So it's just adjusting your technique a little bit for added effect. Now sometimes we don't always want that. We want it to just look, we'll want to stamp it out in black, you know, and it gives it a different look. And that it's a good look too. Alright? Okay, but now sometimes when I do something like that with that texture, it gets a little bit busy for me in this area. Okay? So what I might do is you just go back to your color scheme and bring in a little bit more tone just to kind of mellow that texture out a little bit. Okay, maybe I'll do one of these in here. Just turning my stylus tool on edge and giving it a little swipe, okay? About like so. Maybe I'll come in from this side. Not coloring everything out, but just putting a few little streaks in here like that. Okay? Kind of reiterates what's going on up in the sky. There's a little streaky look like that. Okay. Now if you want to pause the video, I don't know where you are. We've added this tone in here. We've added some additional texture going back to our color scheme. Alright. Now what we want to do is we want to go into the scene and we'll add in some additional depth. I was just looking on my desk here. This leafless pine would look kind of interesting here in the foreground. But staying with the idea of simplicity for these Stamp-Along videos, I'll use the same image right here that I used on the previous image for this. Now these concepts here, I mean this isn't just for this one composition here, okay? When you're doing these background trees or creating depth within a scene, if you're stamping a mountain in the background or birds flying in the sky or something like that, what you can do is just look at your color scheme. This could be in greens or something like that, you know, for the trees, and there could be blue water or something, but what you can do is you can go with a lighter value for something like birds in the background. Okay, you don't always have to stamp them with black. If you do them in some kind of color within your color scheme that you're working in, it'll push them back visually. It doesn't have to be this monochromatic look. I would go with this monochromatic look in my workshops because it was just a, you know, a simple thing to do. And when you're, you know, if you have 15 or 20 or however many people are in a class, you know, you want to keep things, you want to, you know, you want it to be about the concepts, and you want people to get the concepts down really well. So I'd always make a point to get around everyone individually as they were doing this. So just keeping it a monochromatic color scheme was the easiest way to do it, because I can tell someone from across the room, use more, you know, use more medium blue, or stamp that out in medium blue, or whatever. You know, more light blue, go and add that in there. Okay, that is the reeds stamped several times, but you can see what that really did now, okay? In this one right here, I stamped in black, and this one I stamped it in black too, but look how much depth there is. Now there's less depth in here because this scene is dried, okay, and it's dried kind of in a dull sheen. I can hit it with some spray and it'll inject some depth into it, you know, but for the most part, you know, those trees in the background are still going to be black, but just by tweaking your color scheme in your scene, you can really push the depth in here, and then by adding an additional layer of tone, in terms of, or not tone, but, well, value, in between your trees and the background sky, you know, in the form of some additional trees here. In this case, it could be a mountain or something like that. You really push the depth in it just that much more, okay? Like an overhanging branch would look really good in here too, you know. or something like that, I can use my black in here on the four corners, and that would push, you know, the composition a little bit more. But for the most part, that's what you can do to increase the depth of your scene. And it doesn't have to be too much, okay? Now, one of the other things that you can do too, let me try it here. This scene has gotten pretty dark, but I've just added this in black. Now let's go in, and I don't know how this is going to look. Let's give it a shot. The scene is fairly dark, but let's add some additional reeds, but we'll do it in our dark blue again, all right? Well, not again, but in terms of changing, you know, the hue and value that you use in something like textures, maybe we can do on an object as well, where the darker one will look closer to us, and the lighter impression, in this case the lighter impression is a dark blue. Let's see if that creates some additional depth within the foreground, okay? I think it looks pretty good, so I'll just add that in there. It looks busier down here, but I don't know if you can tell, but within the reeds itself, you can see a little bit of that darker blue. So it creates depth within the foreground here. You created depth within the kind of the ripples on the water surface by using your different color schemes and values in there. We have some change of values within this space right here. And of course we have some different values working up here just in terms of sky, you know, in terms of, you know, transitions of color, okay? I used quite a bit of that blue over the top of this, but where I have that lighter color of blue underneath, it kind of creates a little bit of a glow. So that's how you can really use, this is just a simple color scheme right here of 3 different blues, but you can really create a lot of depth, visual depth within a scene. And again, it's just by tweaking your technique a little bit, going from something like this, alright, to something like this. The compositions are basically the same. You know, clouds in here instead of that sun converted to a moon. But trees. Now, where some of these trees in the background kind of are a little bit lost, if I wanted to, I can take these trees now and I can stamp them in a darker blue in the darker areas, meaning the sides here too. So you can kind of keep pushing it a little bit more and more and more as you bring some tone in. That doesn't mean you can't restamp, you know, some of your imagery that tended to get lost with all of that coloring that went over the top of it. Alright, so this is one of the scenes that I would always do in my Stampscaping. I can't remember if it was 201 or 102, but it would be kind of the second class I would do, you know, where the first class was all about kind of learning how to compose your elements, overlapping them, how to lay out your colors, and stamping a few scenes out. Then I would teach people how to kind of tweak that technique a little bit. And I think this was the first one that I did in that class. It was either that or a complete black and white monochromatic one. But these are a lot of fun, and I like the end results a lot. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed. If you were stamping along with me, I hope you enjoyed it and learned kind of a couple really simple techniques of how to kind of push the visual range in terms of, I don't know, visual depth within your scenes, okay? Thanks for watching, and as always, thanks for tuning in and checking out the vids.